Gumbadaroo, which is good day in Burragum, the Aboriginal language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Vicky McDonald, State Librarian and CEO at the State Library of Queensland. On behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you to our second online Game Changers event for 2020. I begin by acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their continuing connection to land and as custodians of stories for millennia. Here at State Library, we are inspired by this tradition in our work to share and preserve Queensland's memory for future generations. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome our speakers for this afternoon, Yaron Lifschitz, Artistic Director and CEO of Circa, our facilitator, Ray Weeks, CEO in Residence at QUT Business School and Chairman of the CEO Institute of Queensland, members of the Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Library Foundation Council and the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Governing Committee, who are watching from their homes this afternoon. Founding partner, QUT Business School, our generous sponsors, Pitcher Partners, Channel 7, Morgans, NAB and RACQ, friends and supporters of State Library of Queensland. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the second Game Changers for 2020. The series brings together innovative leaders from business, technology and creative industries who encourage us to dream big. Game Changers is an initiative of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame presented by State Library of Queensland and the QUT Business School. You can watch recordings of past conversations on our website, where you also have access to a range of other inspiring business resources. The Queensland Library Foundation is a founding partner of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame and works to support our many community projects and services. If you have the means, please consider donating in support of our work and projects. All donations $2 or more are tax deductible and every dollar goes towards our projects. At the conclusion of this afternoon's pre-recorded conversation, we will cross live to Yaron and Ray via Zoom to answer your questions. I encourage you to tweet your questions during the conversation by using the hashtag QBLHOF, or for those watching on Facebook Live, add your questions to the comments field. I look forward to hearing about Yaron's incredible journey, from the beginnings as the youngest director ever accepted to NIDA to his current role at Circa, an international leader in the creative industries. His work has been seen in 40 countries and won 6 Helpman Awards. Today you will hear from this inspiring entrepreneur and leader and the incredible work that he is undertaking. Enjoy the Game Changers discussion.
Thanks so much, Vicky, and let's welcome the person who helped pioneer contemporary circus in Australia, and his work has been seen by over 1 million people across 6 continents. The Artistic Director and CEO of Circa, Yaron Lifschitz, and he is also described as the roving ringmaster. So, Yaron, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you with us. Now, before we start, I should say to everyone here tonight that we encourage you to tweet your questions during the conversation by using the hashtag QBLHOF. For those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, just add your comments to the field. All right? So, Yaron, again, welcome.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you with us. Now, how do you describe what Circa represents and delivers for audiences? Does the description contemporary circus really capture it?
Contemporary circus is a placeholder for something that hopefully will emerge as in its own right. I think it's useful because it connects us with the glorious tradition of circus, the 3,000 years of acrobatics, hundreds of years of horses trotting around with people doing amazing things on them, and we have that connection to the traditional languages, but the contemporary edge, thinking about it like an art form, using contemporary art practice, not having animals, being something that is artistic as well as entertaining, I think is important in that. But the titles are dry. I mean, the titles are categories of things you use for forms that have already no longer exist. What interests me is what this thing is going to become or turn into. And I think the experience for an audience is, I want an audience to come along and feel a feeling that they do not currently have a name for. So there's a concept in biology called a holotype, which is the first example, the thing that describes the species. I see our work as aiming to be a kind of emotional holotype. You come along to that show and you say, I just saw En Masse by Circa, and I now have a feeling, and the only way I can describe that feeling is to say that's En Masse. That's a Circa production. I think that's a mixture of wonder and excitement. I like to think about it of it at its core as art that doesn't bore.
Well, you deliver that wonder and excitement in every sense. Now, you once described, let's go back to 2004, you once described Circa as the little company that could. What did you mean by that?
Well, in 2004, we were 3 acrobats and me in a room,
right.
And we had big dreams, and we wanted to do stuff, and we wanted to make an impact. And so we kept trying things, and I think our sense of agility and engagement and lack of belief when people said we couldn't was really important. So, you know, we had the choice to spend a lot of time in a room with a few good people, great people, or do things the way everyone else did it. And I decided to spend a lot of time in a room with a few good people. But in 2004, that meant I was doing the lights. We didn't have any stage management. Costume design was me saying to 3 artists, here's $150 each, go out and find something you can do the show in that you don't think is going to be too dreadful, bring it back for me to see. Meant I was doing the set design, you know, etc., because we didn't have money for anything else, because we'd invested it all. I think pooling your resources in extreme ways, being essentially, if it was a war, we would have been kind of asymmetric, fighting asymmetrically like guerrillas. It was a guerrilla war. I often think we were the pirates, and now our current challenge is how do you deal with becoming the Navy? It's a very different kind of experience.
And in 2004, you wrote a strategic plan where you decided to, quote, conquer the world. I mean, how are you doing?
Well, I don't think we knew what the world was because we were in a small room in Brisbane, and I'm not entirely sure conquering really meant very much to us apart from it sounded a lot better than be slightly less obscure and slightly less close to insolvent. So conquer the world was a kind of slightly more aspirational way of saying that. But look, we've done incredibly well for a company that is still really that little company that could. I mean, we perform around 400 shows a year in about 15 countries. We have a full-time ensemble of roughly 20 or so artists who work year-round. They get paid regardless of whether they do shows, train, on breaks. We have a great team here in Brisbane, and we're continuing to work even in these complex times.
So if you think back to when you were at the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, also known as NIDA, you were the youngest director ever accepted into its prestigious graduate director's course. I mean, what has your NIDA training delivered for you to date? And talk about, could you have envisioned the success, the global reach that your productions have had to date when you were back at that point?
Well, of course, one of the things about NIDA is that, like all elite academies, whatever you do will never match what you think you're going to do when you get into the joint. Because, of course, you're somehow going to be the most radical avant-garde director, and you're going to run the National Theatre and the Royal Opera House, and because the scope of your ambition at age 20 is limitless, as it should be, preposterous, as it almost inevitably is, and the fall-off is one of the things you learn, that actually reality is hard. You go to work every day, and I think one of the things NIDA helped give me was a sense of it doesn't matter how tired you are or how hard you think you've worked, you can always do more. And I think that, a modicum of talent, like a tiny drop of talent and a huge amount of grit are really, really good ingredients for getting on with it. The other thing that NIDA did was it brought you into a cohort of professionally minded people, both inside the team, but also we have everyone would come and visit Mel Gibson,
Kate Blanchett.
But even the visiting, every artist, you saw shows every night. You were absolutely ridiculously tired for the whole course, and the energy that it built, the sense to focus on yourself and your own practice, but to be engaged in a sense that this was like, you know, sort of this kind of special forces in a way. You were kind of, more was asked of you and you had to give more and find more reserves of energy, creativity, intelligence. But also it was very practical minded. It was remarkably free at the time that I did it of Kant. It was a professional training institution. It was a guild. We didn't spend a lot of time studying theory. I mean, we talked about ideas, of course, but how you focus a light and how you get a lighting designer to realize a vision and how you engage them through a process are actually what you need to put on a show. To understand the kind of detailed photometrics of light or the political agenda of whether things are light or dark are great conversations to have. That's why you have universities. And I think that at the time anyway, I don't know if it's still the case, it was a very practical, hands-on institution. And it gave me a sense that I think having come out of a very academic kind of studying historiography and literature into a place that was about doing really appealed to me.
And coming back to what you were saying earlier, with reputable productions to your name, ranging from large-scale events, opera, theatre, physical theatre, circus, what was the opportunity that led you to Circa?
So I always had a very clear sense that I was not a preternaturally gifted director. So there are those people that can just transform things on stage into things of beauty. That was not me. So I felt like that one of my abilities, though, is the ability to drill deep into form. And I wanted to work with something that was playing with form. And at the time that I was looking for my next adventure, a company to run, when I was ready to do that, there were 3 or 4 companies in Australia. One was an opera company, one was a puppetry company, and one was Rock and Roll Circus in Brisbane, that I thought were all based in a particular form. And I thought that's something led me to that. So I was interested in the idea of drilling into a form and discovering it. I came to Rock and Roll Circus, and my first day I thought, why have I never seen this? I've seen circus, I've applauded, but I've never felt the emotional energy coming off this. I've never seen someone tumbling through a shaft of light. We were at the old museum at the time, and there was, you know, dust in the beautiful shaft of light. And I saw it as something profound and human and vulnerable and full of kind of risk and poetry. And I thought, that's what I need to put on stage. It took me a long time to get there, and I still frequently fall short of it, but I have a very clear memory of that experience.
So you've led Circa for over 20 years. Why does it continue to really inspire you? Clearly it does. And what do you enjoy most about the role? And maybe take us through some of the big challenges you're dealing with.
It's really funny to talk about leading it. I feel like I'm on the back of it and I'm holding the reins, but I very rarely get to influence much about where the horse runs. Hanging on for dear life is probably
It's like being on water skis with a boat ahead of you.
That's right, and I can't see the boat. I don't know what it is. Look, I love it because I'm never bored. Directing, I fell in love with directing because it was the only thing I'd ever done that used everything that I had. I would finish a rehearsal and I would be completely spent emotionally, intellectually, artistically. Everything gets used, and your flaws and your weaknesses are amply displayed in everything, and brutally so. And I quite like that. Circa is a complex beast because we've never been based in a kind of rational business model. So a rational business model says, here are the inputs that will generate the income and here are the expenditure, and these one outweighs the other, and there's some kind of logical connection between the two. Circa's not been based on that. Circa's based on a kind of a model that says, if you get enough really good people together and you can go deep enough, you'll be able to find something of value. And if you're awake enough and creative enough, you might find some way of turning that thing of value into something that you can commodify or sell to someone. But it may have very little connection to what you spent all that time doing. So your business costs and your inputs may be at best tangentially connected. Yeah, you might land up selling the thing that you left in the room after you finished the day's work with no idea why that's producing value. in which case normally in a business you become the company that makes that stuff.
That's right.
We don't. We just kind of reinvest it in the artists doing the thing they do. So it's a company that I see as being dogged and pursued by the restlessness of questioning. And I think that means that we're constantly at the place where we have to exist in the zone of discomfort and of adventure. That's a thrilling, exciting, exhausting place to be.
Disruption?
Well, I think disruption is an interesting thing because after a while you'll end up, the only people who can disrupt you are yourself. And the need to self-disrupt is, I think, something we became very conscious of about 6 or 7 years ago. So it's one of the reasons I've stayed at Circa for 20 years is it hasn't been the same company for 20 years. After changing the name from Rock and Roll Circus, a venerable Brisbane-based institution that by the time I got there was on its kind of last company and conceptual legs. It was set up as a collective. The collective had dissipated and it needed a change. It had run out of its welcome with the funding agencies. So we took a few years, discovered what we were doing, became Rock and Roll Circus. The first phase of that was to get our work to internationally, and we did that. Then it was to kind of build the size of the ensemble and to cement that international market. So that happened between 10 and 13, 14. Then it was to embark on a range of really exciting projects, which we did over the last 5 or 6 years, including working in cathedrals and cemeteries, bigger scale shows, kinds of some of the production slate we're now working on, while building more consistent touring models. And now we're entering, I think, the next phase of our work, and that's partly about our home base, sinking roots here, about diversity and asking how does circus change the world, can it change the world for the better? I think it's about saying, well, what are the new frontiers? What are those disruptions that we have to make in our art? And finally, it's about saying, how can we as a company be ready for the future? Because as William Gibson said, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Exactly.
And we have to find those pockets of it. And this time at the moment is the perfect example of that. We came back from Paris. We were about to get on a plane to New Zealand. We suffered a complete and catastrophic loss of all of our income and all of our gigs. But because we were future ready, we were tooled up to work remotely. We had multiple contingency plans. We could creatively engage. First of all, we retained all of our staff, including all of our artists, at work. We haven't been, apart from scheduled holidays, we haven't been off. We will be the first people to be on stages back in Brisbane and coming up very soon. We are about to open a major show in Austria, and we've got a range of projects. We've released a podcast series, and a couple of other kind of interesting outputs and evolutions. And the aim of that is to say, effectively, the company is not the same thing. What you know as the company is the collected history and a bit of an idea. What the company actually is a group of people asking a question about what tomorrow might be.
So with the coronavirus crisis, will it amplify or change what Circa does as a business, and what challenges has it presented? You've outlined very clearly the limited impact that you've been able to manage.
Yeah, look, I think the one thing that I know is I know the question, not the answer. I really don't know what's going to happen. I mean, for people in the live entertainment industry and live arts, performing arts industry, the COVID crisis has been catastrophic. We can't do our job. We're the first business to be closed down and we'll be probably the last to reopen. The current financial models and structural models are completely impossible. Like, you can't work when you need to sell a quarter of your tickets.
Exactly.
At the moment, we're investing. The phase that I describe ourselves in is like, we're like Amazon now at the beginning, or Uber. You're going to lose a fair bit of money. You're going to put things out in the market as quickly as you can to try and get market share and take advantage of opportunity and demonstrate your willingness and engagement. But at the moment, it's not financial, and there's a limit to how long we can keep doing that, burning through reserves and the goodwill and donations of others. But the difference is we think we can make a difference and we're not focused on profit. What that turns into in the future, I think for me the biggest thing that it's highlighted is this. I realised through the process that I don't go to the theatre to be entertained. That sitting at home with my partner and my dog on the big screen with the cup of hot chocolate watching a Netflix series is a fundamentally more entertaining proposition than what happens to me in the theatre. I go to the theatre because I think something important happens in there. And I'm prepared to spend a lot of money, sit next to a stranger in a semi-comfortable seat, not sure about whether the person in front of me is really tall and I won't be able to see the stage perfectly, watching a show that most of the time probably won't be really great because most art isn't, and we experience theatre live, so we see it all, not just the highlights package from history. Because something happens in that room, in that shared experience, that is, I can't get at home. So for me, it's a kind, I love the Gerhard Richter, the painter, the artist, said that art is the highest form of hope. I think that for me, something important happens in that room, and I'm interested in the importance of it, much more so than the entertainment. I think the entertainment is the coating on the pill that you swallow that says, hey, you can have a good time. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not, it doesn't justify the expense or the energy or the complexity of the experience. What we have to figure out is how do we take that thing, which I see as being a duty in the same way as exercise or going to the synagogue or church is a duty. You don't go there because it's fun. I mean, it might be, but you go there because it's deep and it's meaningful and it enriches your life and it makes you a better human.
That's right.
And I think at the moment, as a civilization, we need better humans. So I see this as a kind of a duty that we have to figure out how to enliven that. And in circus, we've got a superpower, which is we don't have to bore people to do it.
And in so doing, support humanity. Let's just go to leadership for a moment. What can commercial leaders learn from arts leaders?
I think there's a lot of things you can learn. One of them is a negative that we don't mean to teach, which is don't be entitled. It's never a good look. I think the arts have a sense of their own, we can very easily have a sense of our own exceptionalism. Like I've just said to you in the previous moment, I think it's a form of duty. It's an important spiritual act for our species. I do believe that, but I don't believe that entitles us. And I've noticed in some of our discourse and my own, we can sound a bit like entitled Pratt. So I think one of the things you can learn as a business leader is don't be entitled. Earn your seat at the table. Justify your being in the game. Not assume that it's pre-existingly important, because it isn't. Because very easily you can shut theatres down. You can burn books. You can ignore everything. So have a sense of kind of the ice is thinner than you think it is. I think is one lesson that I've learned very recently. I think it's really important that the arts don't say to business, I don't believe in any way we're more creative than business. I think creativity is a function that, I see extraordinary creativity, whether it's in the App Store or on YouTube or in the kind of, I get many more ideas from reading Harvard Business Review than I do from reading Poetry Journal. And I read both of them. But Harvard Business Review is full of extraordinary research and fascinating perspectives, creative minds. So I don't think it's creativity. What I think the arts can tell you is it's got some good lessons about resilience, and it's got some really good lessons about how people who care. Because ultimately nothing in the arts works if it's not fueled by love. And love is very difficult to scale. And love is very difficult to quantify.
You talk about in your productions, you explore love, loss, vulnerability.
Yep.
Just describe that for us.
Well, I'm a part of my kind of aesthetic and kind of emotional connection to our species and to humans as a thing is that I think that we're just really, really ordinary creatures in most regards. Like we spend a lot of time trying to get someone to fly on a trapeze, but an injured pigeon does it much better. And whereas we're kind of very low in the ape level at strength. So the fact that like my medium is interesting is because not despite the fact that we aren't very strong, agile compared to the rest of the animal world, but actually because of it. So it makes me think that it's the kind of heroics of our efforts that define us, not what you start with. And as a parent of a child with a disability, I really noticed this. Like, you go, what does success mean when someone can't realistically fly a plane that they desperately want to, or become Prime Minister or win a Nobel Prize? So what does success mean? How do you have a successful life? Well, you have a life by engaging with your capacity, by how you treat people around you, and by how human, emotional, complex, nuanced you can experience the world based on what you have given to you. For me, vulnerability and strength are not opposites. Strength is vulnerability. It's much easier to dominate than to engage. It's much easier to say you're right loudly, and increasingly loudly, as we can see particularly from America, than to say I might be wrong, or maybe let's countenance another view, or let's figure out where my perspective ends and yours begins, and see if there's even a small crossover. And those things manifestly make us better.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Now, before we go on, I just want to again encourage you to tweet your questions during the conversation by using the hashtag QBLHOF. For those of you watching on Facebook Live, just add your comments to the field. Okay? So you're here because you're a game changer. You're here because you approach business in a way that disrupts the status quo, which we've just been exploring, challenges the norms, and creates a new way of doing things. In explaining what you have done and what you are doing at Circa, do you see yourself as a game changer?
I think I probably do, but in inadvertent game changer. Partly because I don't come from the kind of world that wasn't artistic, wasn't theatrical, didn't act, dance, sing, do acrobatics. So I partly was just unaware there was a game going on a lot of the time. Partly I think it helps to make the distinction between finite and infinite games. Finite games whose your success is determined by whether you win or lose don't interest me, particularly from a business sense. I think that they're a mug's game. Infinite games where long-term survival and value creation and allowing the thing to morph into whatever it's going to become, even if that means you're no longer there, I think interest me greatly because they strike me as being organically authentic. That's kind of the way way things work. Exactly. So the process for me is much more gardening than building. And I think anyone who knows me knows that because I can't do either of those things, that they are only metaphors. And I think the final thing is that games obviously are a metaphor. And for me, what I do can't be approached like a game, but in retrospect and seen from the outside, of course, I'm putting on shows in theatres, more than 1 million people have seen the work. I'm deeply proud and impressed by that, and I'm absolutely delighted. But of course, in the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty puny number. That leaves pretty much the same number of billions of people who haven't seen the work and never will, most of them. So therefore, my impact in the world is fairly small. So I guess my sense of kind of what the game is, inside it doesn't feel like a game. Outside it might, and what we can add to it, I think we're good at disrupting, and I think we're good at rethinking things.
But forget the zero-sum game.
There is no zero-sum game, and it's von Neumann's kind of game analysis is brilliant and super insightful to the point where it tells you don't do things this way. I think to be honest, I think most business is much more a quantum state. There's just this kind of massive probability fields, probability functions that are uncollapsed. What strategy is about choosing in which direction to collapse them, knowing that you probably won't be in the right one.
So how do you keep innovating, coming up with new ideas?
Terror. I mean, if there's someone younger and more talented than you, there's someone with more access, more resources, there's someone, there's always people and there's always opportunities that you aren't getting. And if you aren't, particularly at the moment, if you aren't deeply terrified by what happens if you stop, then you probably will stop. I think terror tethered to love are the kind of two engines that make the thing run.
good statement. Do you see yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, look, I'm very divided. I think that there's, in my work, I think that there are people who are much better artists than me, and there are people who are much better business leaders than me. I don't know that there are a lot of people who combine the two at the same level that I can do them. And I think that's my special, very niche and not particularly marketable space. That space, though, means that I tend to think about, I apply creativity as much to the shows that I'm working on as the strategies that I'm developing. And that, and the organizational kind of initiatives. I think that's good. I think that's right. And sometimes I look back at a year or two and think, oh, well, we really felt like we were really busy, but we didn't pivot anywhere near enough. And we're much better when we pivot.
So for you, for businesses to survive, they've got to pivot, they've got to change, they've got to adapt. I mean, that's the approach you've taken with Circa, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I can't imagine that there's a lot of businesses that survive just doing the same thing unless the world is very stable. So when you Google the oldest companies in the world, they're all Japanese.
Yep.
And they're 1,000 years, 900 years, incredible places in a very stable, quite homogenous society with a limited set of inputs and a clear clientele. That's not been my experience, and I don't think it's the way the world's going.
No.
So being able to pivot doesn't mean losing your values, though you can sometimes mislay them. It doesn't mean losing your strategic focus, though very often it gets obscured and there's a shinier thing to grab or to lust after. But what it does mean, I think, is saying the way, the tools the resources we have, the place we want to get to, and the obstacles we face are not symmetrical, they're not predictable, they're often not even knowable till after you've done them. So would we rather be a large 17th century style infantry marching in its get-up, firing bayonets when shouted at, or a resilient group of contemporary special forces, secret ops, a kind of intelligence network that can kind of walk through, sometimes appear, sometimes disappear, shape-shift as needed, use MacGyver, whatever's there. And you go, well, one of those is exciting, and one of those sounds a lot like we're going to get shot. So I'm pretty clear where I want to be.
So forget the British East India Company approach, right?
The British East India Company, apart from being desperately old-fashioned, is also morally heinous. And I think, exactly. While even as I was using a military metaphor, I go, there's nothing about this that involves attack for me. What it involves is looking for the opportunities. And an opportunity is simply a light you are well positioned to see. It's a crack that you you're moving at the right pace and you line up with the light source.
Let's go back to leadership for a moment. What's the one characteristic that you believe every leader should possess? And what personal attributes do you think you've brought to this that generates the leadership that you are recognised for?
Look, I think summing up to one is really tough. Care, love, stewardship. I mean, I think giving a toss about what happens ultimately. I think responsibility is incredibly important. Taking responsibility. I think it's up to others to really know what I bring. I can only see myself through my focus, which is I try and deliver those things. I don't know if I do.
But if I asked your team, tell me about Yaron, they'd say
they'd probably laugh.
What would they say about your leadership?
I genuinely don't know.
They'd know where they stood with you, wouldn't they?
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think that hopefully they'd say he's clear and fair, and he brings some good ideas, and he's got some crazy ones. He lets us talk, but sometimes he talks too much. And we're still here. And I think, it's very easy to underestimate the victory of still being here, particularly in the arts, which is constantly on this 1,000 precipices. In circus, it's bodies, but it's finances, it's touring work, it's everything. So still being here is a really positive affirmation in the arts, not, we increased our third quarter earnings by 2%. Actually, we're still here is a really powerful statement.
So you're not going to say last year we're on the edge of a precipice. this year we take a great leap forward?
Yeah, well, it often feels like that. There are those moments in this business where you have to believe that there is some kind of intent behind something, because otherwise you would never get away with it. And that's not to say we are as robustly planned and risk managed as any organisation, as we've proved in this period. But at the end of the day, this is, the arts is not a business. It's a kind of, we're not an industry. We're essentially a clump of dysfunctional systems tethered together by love and some sense that we still matter to some people in the wider firm, audiences, stakeholders. And then we try and figure out how to turn that into a business, which is a fascinating kind of intellectual exercise apart from anything else.
So tell me, let's just quickly talk, of course, running towards the end of this conversation. What is the biggest mistake you've ever made, or regret that you have?
I regret not doing some things sooner.
Yeah.
I am naturally risk adverse. Even though I think about myself as an entrepreneur, I'm fueled by a kind of productive pessimism. And there's a lot of things that I wish I'd just done sooner. And there's a bunch of tough conversations that I wish I'd had.
Okay, good. Now, again, don't forget, we encourage you to tweet your questions during this conversation by using the hashtag, as I've said to you earlier. What's been your greatest achievement?
Look, I think still being here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Absolutely.
Good. And let's go just what's on the horizon. You've given us some idea, but you've got some views coming out of this challenging period that there are elements, maybe the world will be quite different. So what's on the horizon for you? Can you share any plans that you have? Look,
no, I won't share any real plans with you because that would be giving the game away. What I can say mostly at the moment is I'm absolutely hell-bent and dogged about us becoming a more diverse organisation because we need to be. That's artistically, culturally, in kind of every dimension, in our people, in our work. I want us to find deeper roots, so we're working with sort of base camps and satellite hubs. We're strong in, we will become strong in regional Queensland, around Australia and internationally in this way, where we have places that we have deep relationships with. We're doing a major refit on our participation, engagement, inclusive and accessibility programs because we don't do enough for enough people. And I do believe that arts in general and circus can make this a better world. And I think we've been too focused on touring shows, which has kind of got us to the point where we can now do this. So I'm really excited by that. It's going to be at the forefront of what we do. And I don't mean that to be the virtue signaling part. Someone came to me the other day and said, should we change our email footers to, we acknowledge traditional owners of the land? I said, yes, but after we've got the programs that really mean that. Let's do that. Let's send the smoke up after this fire. Let's really light let's get that fire burning. Good. So that's what is really exciting me at the moment. Good.
Now look, this audience tonight will be live streaming, emerging artists. It'll be business people, entrepreneurs, innovators. Any final advice?
Look, we could, hopefully we tease some things out in the conversation. But for me, I have the great privilege of having woken up every day for the last 20 plus years and loving what I do. And it gives me access to a boundless reservoir of energy and ideas and emotional strength. And I feel like as a leader, it's our job to give that to the people that are working with and for us. To help them recognise when it's not on their journey, when they won't be able to access that through the organisation, but also to realise that if you have it, it's a gift, and that it's a gift it's a precious gift that you shouldn't waste, because it means that you're in a kind of, you're in the inside highway lane of your own life, and that's an exciting place to drive.
Yaron, it's been a pleasure, true pleasure, talking to you. At this point, usually there'd be 200 people. demonstrating their pleasure in what we've had in this conversation. We're going to take a short pause now and restart the conversation to address the questions that have come in from the audience. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, silent, but nevertheless, hopefully present audience.
Thanks. Yaron, welcome back. This is where you get to address the audience questions, and there have been some great questions coming through. So let's just start with a question that came through on Twitter. What's been your approach to opening up new touring markets for Circa? I mean, the company's, as this questioner says, the company's a very successful Australian export. What's been your approach?
We've worked really on a business-to-business level. We've recognised that we can't know audiences and micro markets across the world. But what we can know is the couple of thousand presenters in the world who get to make the decisions and are the gatekeepers. So we spend a lot of time talking to them, believing in them, finding out what they like, and recognising that whenever you put on a show, a whole lot of people have to take a risk and invest in it. Someone has to sell it to their board, to their management, to really make things possible. So we really need to give people great reasons to want a program, but also we need to listen to them, get their feedback, have conversations. So I think we've worked really on personal relationships as the basis of what we do, often to the exclusion. We often go to performing arts market and kind of trade fair for the arts and bring no collateral. And go, look, really, it's about us and you having conversations. That seems to work up to a point, but ultimately the thing that sells a show is the show. So getting people to see them, bringing people out to see shows, encouraging them to engage with us. They seem to be the best things. Plus, like everything in this business, luck and timing are, it's you're just building a platform for luck and timing.
Mm-hmm. And what artistic endeavour has really captured your imagination during this shutdown period?
Look, I've been really astonished at the level of resilience and innovation throughout the arts sector. I mean, we've all been hit really hard, and some, particularly the small to medium and independent sectors, have been savaged and gutted. Not being able to perform is pretty bad. So the fact that everyone's got on with it, people have done things from watching the Paris Opera Ballet teach ballet classes in their living rooms to individual artists running streaming services, putting their content up. That stuff's been terrific. For me, I love the three-dimensionality and the kind of presence, the aura of being around the original thing, like really there. And the piece that struck me personally most deeply was a piece that I saw in an exhibition and showed the other night at the end of a dinner party to my partner and a friend, thinking, we'll watch this for 2 minutes. I just want to sort of make a point about a particular type of work that I was thinking about. And it goes for 50 minutes later, and 50 minutes later, we were still there in absolute silence. And that for me was an astonishing piece. That was Ragnar Kjartansen's The Visitors, which is a 9-screen video installation piece. Obviously filmed on one screen, so not the full exhibition. But even at a distance and even in the wrong medium, it still retained that undeniable kick in the guts that is a live piece of performance, a live piece of authentic art, true piece. And that was just stunning. And I realized that my boundaries for what I thought was possible in a digital medium, digitally mediated space were lower than I'd imagined, and that I should be open to being shattered by anything from any direction.
And we did cover this in the conversation, but one of the questions that has come through is, what advice do you have for someone aspiring to be in a leadership role?
Look, the way I see it, it's, when you watch the great New Zealand rugby union backlines, the number of phases, and as well as the fine Australian ones from time to time, the number of great phases means that people individually hang on to the ball for quite a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. I think that's very much what happens, whether you're in a business for 6 months or 20 years, it's still quite a short amount of time. So what you want to do is take it, you want to advance some yards, and you want to pass it on to the next person with a bit more, opportunity than you found it. So to do that, I think I think a sense of engagement and compassion. I think a sense of kind of care for the world around you, and love and respect for the people you work with, gathering the right team, and finding your own true moral and kind of ethical north, and making sure that you always know what that compass is aligned to. Because, I don't think in certainly our neck of the woods, business woods, you don't get a lot of corruption, morally compromising conversations, but you constantly have to deal on a daily basis with things that exist in grey areas of, do you extend a benefit to one person or another? Do you push back on a client or not? And there's no one size fits all. So you have to know, what do you actually feel good with in your heart? What can you go home with and say, I balance the need to keep my 60 staff employed and have them eat today with the need to kind of make sure that I'm acting kind of responsibly and ethically in the world. And just remain endlessly hungry to learn, because none of us know very much about anything.
And look, we were talking earlier, and in the conversation you said you were digital ready. Now, what are the key things you had prepared? And we're also talking about digital agility. So take us through your stance there.
Well, we were caught in a really interesting position. So as an organisation, Circa was supremely ready to work globally because we've been doing it for years. So everything that we do is essentially able to be done from anywhere in the world, as long as you've got space for the physical acrobats to be in. But we have our company Bible, our user manual for the company is a sort of wiki space on a system called Confluence. We've been working on Zoom for communication for years. We have a system called Twist, which is a kind of Slack for slackers, really. But it's an internal communication channel and posting message board system. We work on, all our files are cloud-based. So everything on that level was really easy. Our accountant, our head of finance manager is based in Melbourne. Our senior producer spends 4 days a week working from home. It makes no difference to us as an organisation. I'm used to being on the road for 6 months of the year. The only question that I can't answer usually is, where are you? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm somewhere, but everything else will work. So we're supremely well calibrated for that. What we were supremely badly calibrated for was getting stuff in our work into the digital sphere. And that had to do with a whole lot of things. First of all, it doesn't translate very well. It's not been particularly well filmed. There's an endless problem when you do the initial season. You want to film a show as early as possible so you can send it to people to buy it, right? But early on, it's often not ready. And often you can only film it for a few nights in the context of the theatre environment, which means someone's head's in the way, someone's coughing, you didn't get the seat you wanted to shoot it from. So often the first record of the show isn't very good. Finally, what we discovered was we had a lot of rights and permissions issues because the music copyrights that we come under do not allow us generally to broadcast that material. So a lot of our work, some of it we owned, we had commissioned and we had control of, but a lot of our work we weren't able to broadcast. So while we were this company that was set up with every option to communicate with the public, most of the intellectual property and kind of art stock that we had, we couldn't get out there. And even if we'd wanted to, and a lot of it, there was no point in putting out because it wasn't very good. So we've been working to rectify that. We've made new material. We've repurposed some old material. We've cut a few bits judiciously. We've got a piece going out at a major American dance festival digitally, and we've cut some sections off that show so we can show the bit we definitely have the rights to. And it's been a kind of a real learning adventure.
Music has played such an important part of all your productions. Music is the way you select the music. I just find it fascinating. Just explain the role that music has to play in your productions and how you go about selecting some fairly distinctive pieces.
Look, music is the kind of the lifeblood. If I can't hear a show, I generally can't make it. Some shows are led by music. We obviously work a lot in classical music and opera, where the music is the kind of the script, it's the text. If you're doing Beethoven 9 or Orpheus and Eurydice, then the music is the story you're telling. We have a series of shows that are kind of mixtape shows where there's a series of songs or musical ideas that inspire me, and by careful kind of curation and correspondence and structuring, I'm able to create some kind of form or structure. And then we also work with existing living composers. Living composers have always more trouble because when you cut their work, they don't like it. You know, Bach doesn't care when I cut his last Art of the Fugue, but the three of the composers I'm working with at the moment would have something to say if I cut their great masterpiece because it didn't fit my, show. So there's always but you get a lot of beautiful, amazing things that happen because you're working with a living person and a creative artist who's responding to your ideas. And often it takes you in unusual directions. My, what we've learned through this process is that music is not simple, and there are a number of rights and mechanical and broadcast rights that attach to it. And you can fall deeply in love with a piece of music. You can build your show and not be able to use it. That's one of probably the most frustrating thing in life. And it's always a kind of a bit of a dance.
So let's look at, give us an example of something you wished you'd done sooner, and maybe a conversation that you'd wish you'd had.
Wow. Look, I wish I'd changed the name of Rock and Roll Circus to Circa sooner. And I'd wanted to do it about 3 years earlier, but I hadn't been able to find a name. And finding a name is the most, in retrospect, it's the easiest thing in the world. You always knew it. On the road there, it's a road of so many moments of embarrassment, of ringing people up and saying you've got it, of sending them the thing and them saying, no, it's not it. And it's a really, devastatingly tough process, I found, because I just didn't have the right name until one night I went, I think it's Circa. And the people I was with went, yeah, it is. And we became Circa, and that's what we've been ever since. I wish I'd done that sooner, and I wish I had in terms of conversations that I wish I'd had earlier. Look, every time I get to the end of a process with a staff member who I've had to ask eventually to leave or who has decided to leave, and it's been clear to me for months or sometimes years that they weren't the right person for the job. And I've believed in both my own ability to performance manage them and my own fear in not necessarily wanting to be disliked or have a tough conversation. I've always regretted not doing it earlier. We've always found someone better, more better for the role, more suited. We've always found we've always been able to kind of, I think, negotiate the right kind of exit. And I think learning to do that much sooner is something that a lesson that I seem to keep needing to relearn.
One thing we did explore a little in the conversation, but there's been a question that's come through on Facebook. What would be the best way to start down this path that maybe you wish you'd known when you were starting out?
Look, I think what I would have done differently is spend more time building a network and more time finding mentors. I tend to be a bit of a self-starter and an autodidact. I kind of like to figure out my own way through things, and that's good, but it's not always good. And I think I've only kind of come into the value of mentors and a real kind of peer network and kind of network of senior peers later in life. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm available to people much earlier in their careers. Because essentially in the arts, we're one of the very few businesses that says to people, we really don't want you to succeed. Like, all the director jobs in Australia are currently taken. So it would be really good if you didn't do this, right? And effectively, you have to keep knocking and keep trying to prove your worth until someone goes, well, they're still here, we'll give them a gig. And I think it's pretty toxic. And I think what it makes is hardy people and people who get early luck tend to be successful rather than necessarily always deserving one. So I'm pretty keen to see that situation change.
One question we were talking about a little earlier is really, where did your ambition come from? What do you think? Was it under a rock, or where did you find it?
Look, I'm a great believer that there's this thing called the imposter syndrome. It's not always a syndrome. Sometimes it's the imposter fact. Actually, you don't think you're not quite there. You actually aren't quite there. I've always put myself in a position where I actually am an imposter. Like, I've done one forward roll. That's the sum of my circus career once. And I promised that I would never do it again. It was terrifying. I work in opera, but I can't sing a note or read a score. So I put myself in positions where I deliberately have to have a very, a kind of, the arc of my learning is like a Harrier jump jet taking off. It's like straight up and you have to cling on for dear life. That means that ambition for me comes out of a real need to kind of stay afloat in difficult waters. I like that. I don't like feeling mastery. Kind of doesn't interest me that much. I'm much more interested in the kind of the verb, the doingness of the thing. I've always liked those sculptures where you can see the finger marks, the impressions, the kind of the effort of making. And I like that in the work, and I like that in my own work and in the way I approach things. So I'm much more interested in what the new thing, and I think that's, as much as anything, it's a curiosity for me. It's a curiosity about, well, there's a door and I don't really know what happens on the other side, but let's go in and see if we can hang in there long enough to figure it out before being found out that we really have no place in that room.
So how do you communicate the vision, the direction in your company? How do you go about that?
Look, we're in a bunch of conversations about it at the moment, and I think we don't necessarily do it very well. I think what we do is we're very good at living practice and process, and I think we're pretty good at understanding the overall arc of what we're trying to do. But I think that something between being Australian, so we like to talk things down a bit and not necessarily give the grand Sermon on the Mount that often, being circus, which is deliberately anti-authoritarian and often quite dry, you can kind of sound a bit like a tosser if you go on too much about your vision. And I do think that, I've read a lot of corporate statements in my life. I've read every Fortune 500 company that's available. I kind of know there's a lot of words out there, but I reckon walking the walk is more important than talking the talk. So I kind of think you sort of do it and the sum of what you are actually doing, the sum of your actions is who you are. It's not your vision yet. Your vision is where you're trying to go, and that needs to be stated. But you should be pretty clear you're walking, basically everyone's walking roughly in that direction. And if you are, your vision is, well, we're heading over there. And you don't need to say there's a light on the mount. You do need to say sometimes, and I reckon I could learn to say it more. But I think sometimes the kind of the simple, utilitarian, honest effort is actually a kind of reward in itself.
Yaron, just the last question. What is on the horizon for you? Do you want to share any plans with us today?
Well, we've just announced seasons coming up at Brisbane Powerhouse and Home of the Arts Gold Coast, Hotter Gold Coast, which called Short Pieces for Long Nights, which are pieces we've been making in isolation, duos and solos, small works. We're announcing 5 shows at the moment publicly that we're working on beyond there, which include Cube Studies that'll open in Austria, Mirage and Circa, 2 shows that we're working on that we will probably be taking straight to feature film, and Humans 2.0, which is the second installment of our Humans project, as well as Tomorrow's Parties that'll be opening in the middle of next year. So we're working on 5 or so different shows, as well as trying to position a company for these fairly turbulent waters, which is a kind of interesting act. I was going to say juggling act, but people don't realize this. Juggling is not chaotic objects into order. It's actually extremely ordered objects with a minimum of chaos. You don't want to be juggling. You can't juggle in the kind of outside world. I think navigating or surviving the turbulence of the waters is probably a much more accurate metaphor. We hope we're kind of light enough and agile enough to make it through these tough times. But we also recognise that we're in a lucky position, and lots of organisations and individual artists are having a really tough time.
Yaron Lifschitz, on behalf of this large audience watching you tonight through live streaming, thank you so much. And let me just make a couple of final comments here, if I could. On behalf of the State Library of Queensland and QUT Business School, I'd like to again acknowledge the sponsors of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, principal sponsor, Picture Partners, television sponsors, Channel 7, and major sponsors, NAB and also RACQ. Also to thank our suppliers, Newstead Brewing Company, and also Cloverleigh Wines. We're grateful for your ongoing support and commitment to this program. Stay tuned for more announcements on upcoming Game Changers events via the State Library website. Thank you again, and good night.